I'm Michel de Montaigne, a 16th century French gentleman who locked himself in a tower full of books and ended up writing one of the weirdest, wisest books ever written. It's called Essays, but don't let the title scare you. I basically wrote about whatever I felt like, especially myself, to explore what it means to be human. As I famously said, I am myself the matter of my book. In other words, I dissected me in order to understand us. Pull up a chair or make yourself comfy on that bench, if you like my statue's company, and let's have a lively chat. I promise to be honest, entertaining, and maybe a little shocking, just as I was with my original readers over 400 years ago. Don't worry about formalities. I'll speak to you as a friend. By the end of our conversation, you'll have a clear and colorful sense of my main ideas on self-knowledge, death, custom, education, friendship, skepticism, virtue, and human nature, all in modern terms. Ready? Que sais-je? What do I know? Not much, perhaps, but what I do know, I'll share with you wholeheartedly. Let's begin. Know thyself. Montaigne on self-scrutiny. Let's start with a topic I know best, myself. I spent a lot of time looking in the mirror, not out of vanity, but out of curiosity. You see, I figured that by studying one human me, I might understand all humans. I even claimed each man bears the entire form of the human condition. Every individual, no matter how ordinary, contains the whole range of humanity within. So I turned my gaze inward and reported honestly what I saw, warts and all. Being brutally honest about oneself can be uncomfortable, but I made it my mission. I cataloged my flaws and quirks with frankness and humor. For instance, I admitted I have a terrible memory, little patience for boring lectures, and that I'm extremely lazy when I can get away with it. I once joked that no one could have a lower opinion of me than I have of myself. If I felt ignorant or foolish, I said so. Why? Because owning up to my blockhead moments was liberating. It made me more understanding of others' mistakes and kept my ego in check. To learn that we've done something stupid is one thing. To learn that we are capable of stupidity is far more important. Believe me, I learned that lesson well. Now, you might wonder, what's the point of airing your dirty laundry, Montaigne? My point is that by knowing and accepting myself, the real me, I gain a kind of wisdom that fancy degrees can't provide. I once wrote that whatever I present myself as, so long as it's truly as I am, I've done my job. This authenticity, this self-acceptance, is at the core of my philosophy. I'm not here to pretend to be a saint or a genius. I'm here to show you a normal, fallible man in full. And through that honest self-portrait, perhaps we both can learn something about being human. Importantly, knowing oneself isn't an abstract academic exercise for me. It's practical. I believe self-knowledge makes us freer and more resilient. When you know your own habits, fears, and desires, you're less likely to be completely at their mercy. You can say, I recognize that impulse. That's just my vanity speaking, and perhaps not act on it. Furthermore, by seeing my own changing moods and contradictions, I came to realize that nobody is consistent or perfect. This taught me tolerance. I don't judge others too harshly because I see the same messy humanity in myself. In short, self-scrutiny led me to compassion and an ethics of authenticity, self-acceptance, and tolerance. Let me give you a vivid image of how seriously I took this project of self-study. I often say I produced essays, which in French means attempt at capturing my thoughts and my life. I even describe my writings with a cheeky metaphor. I call them the excrements of my mind, my mental droppings, so to speak. Slightly grossed out? Good. I wanted to shock readers a bit. By comparing my pages to poo, yes, I went there, I was emphasizing how natural and unfiltered my thoughts were. I wasn't serving up a polished marble statue of wisdom. I was giving you the raw, unvarnished Montaigne, straight from the gut. My thoughts might be messy, but they're mine, authentic products of my being. And hey, as I'll remind you later, even kings and queens have to use a chamber pot, so there's no shame in a little earthiness. By taking you on a tour of my own mind and life, I invite you to do the same with yourself. Know thyself. It's ancient advice, the Greeks inscribed it at Delphi, but put it into practice in a new way, by writing candidly about everything I felt and experienced. If you come along, you might discover that my stories spark insights about your own nature. After all, we're built of the same stuff. So, don't be afraid to look within, laugh at yourself a bit, and embrace whatever odd mix of qualities you find. If a proud nobleman like me could confess to being forgetful, indecisive, and fond of napping in the afternoon, then surely you can forgive your own little quirks. In Montaigne's book, literally, being honest about yourself is the beginning of wisdom. Learning to die, face immortality without fear. Let's talk about something heavy. Death. Wait, don't run away. I know death isn't exactly light conversation material, but trust me, it's a topic I learned to face with surprisingly positive attitude. In fact, I famously wrote that to philosophize is to learn how to die. What a cheery slogan, right? But hear me out. I promise this is more liberating than morbid. I lived in an age of war, plague, and violence. Death was all around. I lost my best friend to disease, my father and several children to illness, and I saw my country torn apart by fanatical wars of religion. It was hard to ignore mortality. At first, I was as fearful of dying as anyone, but through reflection and a few close calls, I gradually changed my perspective. I decided that if we want to live well, we must make peace with the idea of death. After all, the first day of your birth leads you toward death as much as toward life. I noted, death is our constant companion from the start. Denying it only makes it scarier. So, what did I recommend? Think about death often. Get familiar with it. Not in a morose, obsessive way, but the same way you might rehearse for a play or drill for an emergency. To be prepared. Less of nothing on our minds as often as death. I advised. By keeping death in view, we rob it of its strangeness and terror. In my essay that to study philosophy is to learn to die, I even echoed an ancient idea. He who has learned to die has unlearned how to serve. What does that mean? It means if you've accepted your mortality, you can't be enslaved by fear or by anyone's threats. A person who isn't afraid of losing their life is truly free. There is no wrong in life for those who have understood that to be without life is no wrong. I wrote, meaning that once you realize death itself isn't evil, it's natural. Nothing in life can cow you. This gave me tremendous mental freedom. Now, I know this all sounds good in theory, but you might be thinking, easy for you to say, Montaigne, you're just philosophizing. Well, life put my ideas to the test. Let me tell you a story. In 1570, I had a near-death experience that profoundly shaped my view of dying. I was out riding one day, a pleasant, sunny day, my horse a very easy but not very strong horse, and a servant riding behind. I was thrown headfirst, many yards through the air. They carried my limp body back home, convinced I would not last the hour. I was vomiting blood and convulsing, so it certainly looked like the end. And you know what I felt as I drifted toward unconsciousness? Not pain or panic, but a kind of sweet languor. I recall taking pleasure in the softness of that state and letting myself float toward sleep. There was no fear. My mind, as if in a dream, was strangely calm. If this was dying, I thought, it isn't so bad at all. When I miraculously recovered, I found that my fear of death had greatly diminished. I had seen that nature perhaps cushions our final moments, making the act of dying easier than we imagine. The experience reframed my perception of death, giving me a clarity and peace I hadn't had before. After that, I doubled down on my practice of meditating on mortality. Death, I realized, is only dreadful to those who haven't prepared for it. I urge readers to accept death as part of nature's exigencies, inherent in life's limitations. We're all going to die, so why not normalize it in our minds? I even suggested doing little exercises. When you tuck yourself in at night, consider that you may not wake up, and that's okay. This isn't nihilism, it's the opposite. By being at ease with death, you remove a huge source of anxiety, which allows you to fully embrace life. I wrote, "He who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave." Once you're free from the ultimate fear, you won't be controlled by the smaller fears. One might say, don't worry about death. Indeed, that became my most fundamental, liberating answer to the question of how to live. I know modern society likes to tuck death out of sight. We use hospitals and funeral homes and avoid the subject. But I'd argue, as I did then, that avoiding thoughts of death diminishes the spirit of being alive. When you make peace with mortality, each day becomes a gift rather than an entitlement. You stop postponing joy and virtue to an imaginary future and start living now. I wanted to rid people of the tyranny of fearing the inevitable. So next time the thought of death makes you squirm, remember old Montaigne. Picture me knocked off my horse, having the most serene out-of-body nap, while everyone else panicked. Winking facing, consider my advice. Talk about death, reflect on it, make it familiar. It's not morbid, it's medicine. It worked for me. I carry the thought of death like a loyal companion, not a lurking shadow. And when my time comes, be it tonight or years from now, I intend to meet it as an old friend, not a feared enemy. Prepare yourself in this way, and you'll live more freely and peacefully, without the constant background noise of dread. After all, the art of living well and the art of dying well are one and the same. The tyranny of custom, how habits shape us, for better or worse. Let's shift gears and talk about customs and habits. All those little and big rules we live by, often without questioning them. You might not realize it, but custom is a tyrant. It can shape our deepest beliefs about right and wrong, normal and weird, without us even noticing. It's just how things are done, we say. But in another country or time, people might do the exact opposite and think we're the weird ones. This idea fascinated me, and I wrote a lot about how cultural norms and personal habits mold our lives. We all call barbers anything that is contrary to our own habits. That's one of my key observations. Humans have this funny tendency. If our tribe doesn't do it, we think it's savage or absurd. But are we right or just biased? I love to turn the tables on my fellow Europeans by examining our customs through the eyes of others. In my famous essay of cannibals, I describe meeting Brazilian natives, or reading about them, who practiced ritual cannibalism. Yes, they roasted and ate the bodies of their defeated enemies. My countrymen were horrified. How utterly barbaric, they exclaimed. But hold on, I said, these cannibals were otherwise quite dignified. They actually lived simply, in harmony with nature, had admirable courage in war, and a society with few lies or deceptions. Meanwhile, what were we Europeans doing at the same time? Oh, just torturing people alive over religion, burning folks at the stake, massacring innocents in the name of God. Civilized stuff. Frankly, I suggested that if one had to choose, there is more barbarity in boiling someone alive than in roasting and eating a dead body. At least a victim to cannibal is already dead, whereas our atrocities were committed on the living. It was a provocative comparison, but my aim was to shake my readers' complacency. Don't be so sure who the savages are. I warned. Perhaps it's us. As I bluntly put, the true barbarians were the conquistadors who mercilessly oppressed indigenous peoples, not the simple natives defending their land. The point here is relativism. Many values and behaviors are not absolute. They are shaped by custom. What is considered polite, honorable, or moral in one culture might be viewed differently in another. For example, in some cultures it was custom for women to go topless, scandalous to a 16th century Frenchman, but perfectly decent to them. Or take something as ordinary as clothing. I muse that if we were born naturally with a big tail, we consider it fashionable and normal, but since we're not, we find a tail man a monster. Silly, right? But it shows how normal is just whatever we're used to. Habit also dulls our sense of wonder. We do things over and over, and eventually we stop questioning them. I called habit a nurse that lulls us, sometimes for better, helping us learn and adapt, but often for worse, numbing our critical thinking. The ceaseless repetition of routine truly blinds to things I observed. As an example, consider how people accept the most atrocious things if they're customary. Public executions were a family spectacle in my day. Folks would bring the kids to watch. Most of them didn't feel horror. It was just how it's always been. That's the power of habit. It can normalize anything, even cruelty. So what's my advice regarding custom? First, be aware of its power. Realize that many of your deepest convictions might just be the result of where and when you were born. This should make you more open-minded and less judgmental. When you see a practice that seems bizarre or wrong, pause and think, is it inherently wrong or just unfamiliar? I learned to do this myself. I traveled and read about far-off peoples from South America to Asia. To expand my perspective, traveling through the world, I wrote, rubbing our brains against others serves to polish and shape our wit. It's like mental exercise. By seeing other customs, you sharpen your own judgment and escape the tunnel vision of your homeland. I urge people to venture abroad, literally or through books, to discover the vast diversity of human ways. This not only broadens the mind, but also teaches humility. Our way is not the only way. Second, don't become a slave to your personal habits either. I chastised myself whenever I got too comfortable with a routine. I wanted to remain flexible. The chief talent of humans is their adaptability and flexibility, I claimed. If you always sleep on the same side of the bed, try the other side sometimes. If you can't imagine breakfast without coffee, skip it once in a while, just to prove you're still the boss of your habits, not vice versa. I practice little inconveniences to keep myself tough and free. We mustn't let the appetite get keener in being served by habit. I warned. Otherwise, life will eventually corner us, because change is inevitable and rigid habits make us fragile. Now, I'm not saying all custom is bad. It's the glue of society in many ways. We need habits and shared norms to live together. But we should examine them and not follow blindly. Where a custom is harmless, fine. Where it's stifling or irrational, dare to challenge it. I myself often poke fun at the bizarre social codes of my time, like how we torture ourselves with fashion or etiquette that makes no sense except everyone does it. Why wear uncomfortable ruffs? Yes, even I wore one, they itch by the way, or wigs. Habit, pure habit. In essence, I encourage you to wake from a sleep of habit. Don't sleepwalk through life doing things just because your parents or peers did. Look around at other ways and choose consciously. It might surprise you how much of what you consider natural is actually just cultural. And that realization is the first step to liberating your mind. It makes you more tolerant, since you see others' weird customs and context, and more autonomous in choosing how you want to live. As a final thought, the next time you encounter someone from a completely different background, instead of thinking, How can they possibly do that? Try thinking, what do I do that might seem just as odd to them? It's a fun exercise and a humbling one. Montaigne's rule. Remember, we're all just conditioned by our little corners of the world. Shake off the prejudice that your norm is the only norm. The world is wide and wonderfully varied, my friend. Enjoy it, learn from it, and above all, don't let habit or custom hold your mind hostage. Teaching and learning. Montaigne's take on education. Now, let's chat about education, something I had strong and unconventional opinions on. My era was big on stuffing young minds with as much Latin, Greek, and theology as possible. Kids were treated like geese being fattened for foie gras, crammed with facts and rules. I hated that approach. Better to have a well-formed head than a well-filled head. I insisted. This quip of mine has become quite famous. It is better to forge your mind into a good shape than to merely fill it with facts. In other words, quality over quantity in learning. Why did I say that? Because education, to me, was about building judgment and character, not just memorizing stuff. I couldn't care less if a student can recite the Aeneid by heart or solve a complex equation if he has no independent thought or understanding. What's the use of a head full of knowledge if it's all jumbled, undigested, and taken from others without question? I compared that to carrying someone else's weapons with not a finger of your own showing, essentially wearing borrowed armor you don't know how to use. Many scholars of my day strutted around spouting Aristotle or scripture, but was all rote. They hadn't made it their own. They were quick to quote authorities, with a lot of fancy huffing, as I put it, to prove a point, but slow to think for themselves. I had a different vision. Thanks to my father, an innovative man, I actually experienced a rather novel education. As a baby, I was sent to live with peasants, to learn compassion for the poor. Then, as a toddler, I was woken by music instead of screaming nurses, to keep me joyful. And here's a kicker. I learned Latin as my first language. My parents and servants spoke to me only in Latin until I was 6. Crazy, right? The idea was to acquire language naturally rather than by dull drills. It worked. By the time I hit school, I was fluent in Latin, though I initially barely spoke French. This unconventional start shaped my views. I saw that education could be humane and tailored to the child, not abusive or one-size-fits-all. In my essay on the education of children, I lay out advice which, if I may boast, was ahead of its time. I argued that a tutor should not merely hammer information into a pupil, but rather engage the child's own reasoning. Learning should be a two-way conversation, not a lecture. I prefer a teacher who asks questions, sparks curiosity, and encourages a student to think independently. A good teacher, I said, will whet and sharpen our wits by rubbing them against others. That means the student should debate, question, even challenge the teacher. In doing so, their mind becomes agile and strong. I also championed real-world experience over bookish knowledge. Books are wonderful, trust me. I lived among them. But life is an even greater teacher. I suggested that a young person should travel, meet different people, see government in action, learn horsemanship, dance, and even how to enjoy life. Education shouldn't be confined to dusty libraries. The value of experience over abstract learning was one of my themes. For instance, instead of memorizing a list of virtues, go out and try to practice virtue in real situations. Instead of just reading about geography, go visit a foreign country, or at least talk to someone who's been abroad. This way, knowledge becomes tangible and meaningful, not just theoretical. I urge caregivers and teachers to let a child's natural curiosity lead the way. The tutor's job is to guide and nourish that curiosity, not stifle it with rote lectures. If a student looks bored or confused, I said, don't beat him over the head, literally or figuratively, with the material. Change your approach. I even dare to say that schools should not use corporal punishment, a radical idea then. Where the mind is forced, it takes no root. I warned. A child who learns under terror only hates learning. Instead, make lessons interactive, relevant, even fun. Debate with the pupil. Pose puzzles. Encourage them to form opinions. If they say something wrong or foolish, don't just scold. Gently show them the error and how to think it through. This way they learn how to learn, which is far more important than memorizing facts. Above all, I value judgment over mere knowledge. A well-trained mind can always acquire facts later, but a mind stuffed with facts without judgment is like a cluttered attic, full but useless. I'd rather you know how to think than what to think. Indeed, I famously said I would rather make a wise man than a walking encyclopedia. And wisdom comes from experience, conversation, and reflection, not just books. Books, in fact, should be treated wisely. Read a lot, yes, but don't worry about remembering everything. Read a lot, forget most of it, and be slow-witted. I quipped humorous, meaning you should absorb what truly matters to you and let the rest flow out. It's fine if you forget the details of half the history you read, so long as the understanding of human nature and the lessons of history sink in. I also encourage learning from life itself. Travel if you can. If not, talk to travelers. Learn a craft. Observe people. No experience is too humble to teach us. I, for one, learned as much chatting with the peasants on my estate or observing the quirks of my own servants as I did reading Aristotle. In my essays, I often celebrate the wisdom of simple folk, and even argue that many uneducated people live more wisely and gracefully than overeducated snobs. Education should help us live better, not just know more. What good is a philosopher who can argue subtleties about the universe, but can't hold a normal conversation or control his temper? I'd take a practical, moderate person over a genius pedant any day. To sum up my schooling philosophy, teach the whole person. Cultivate independent thinking, good judgment, healthy habits, and an open mind. Knowledge is welcome, but only insofar as it connects a life. I wanted education to produce not learned monsters who can recite Latin but behave like fools, but balanced individuals who can reason, judge, and adapt. And I believe this was possible through gentleness, encouragement, and exposing students to the rich tapestry of life, not by cloistering them in a study copying lines. My ideas were somewhat revolutionary. Some thought me too permissive on kids. But guess what? Many of my education tips are now standard wisdom, like learning through experience, critical thinking, and kindness in teaching. If you ever had a teacher who made learning exciting and interactive, you've met a bit of Montaigne's spirit. And if you haven't, well, I invite you to be your own teacher. Stay curious. Keep forming your own judgments instead of swallowing others' opinions whole. Remember, a mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a flame to be ignited. Okay, a Greek said that, but I lived it. That's Montaigne's school of life for you. Class dismissed. Now go live what you've learned. On friendship. Because it was he, because it was I. Of all the topics I wrote about, friendship is one that touches my heart most deeply. I had the great fortune to experience what I consider a perfect friendship, a bond so strong and rare that I frankly think it's one of a kind, or at best, one in a century. In my essay of friendship, I describe my relationship with Etienne de la Boétie, my dear friend who was like another myself. We met when I was in my late 20s serving as a magistrate, and from the moment we truly conversed, it was as if our souls merged. I struggled to explain why we loved each other so much. Finally, I could only say, if you press me to tell why I loved him, I feel it cannot be expressed but by answering, because it was he, because it was I. That enigmatic phrase is my best attempt to convey the mystery of true friendship. It was him, his unique essence, and I, my own peculiar self, that clicked in a way that defied logical explanation. Our friendship was absolute, equal and sublime, one soul in two bodies, as ancient writers would say. We each fully trusted and understood the other. There was no self-interest, no social obligation, no blood relation forcing us. Only pure voluntary affection and a complete sharing of minds. I actually believe such a friendship can only happen once and only between two people. In my essay, I even say that if more than two are involved, it isn't the same perfect friendship. You can love many people, but that total fusion, that complete openness and loyalty, is naturally focused on one special friend. It's not that others aren't loved. It's just that this kind of friendship occupies the whole soul. I wrote, in the friendship I speak of, our souls mix and blend together so completely that they efface the scene that joined them. In other words, we weren't Montaigne and La Boétie any longer in some respects. We became Montaigne, La Boétie, a plural being, us. You might think I'm romanticizing, and I am. I was totally smitten with friendship. I even admitted that this bond was greater than any other relationship, even family ties. I famously suggested that the love in a true friendship runs deeper than the love most experience in marriage. Bear in mind, marriages in my time were often arranged and not based on personal affinity. With a true friend, you choose each other freely for who you are. Because it was he, because it was I, it's a love beyond reason, almost fated. There is, beyond all my reasonings, some mysterious force that made our union. I muse. We sought each other even before we met, drawn by reputation and mutual intuition, as if destiny intended our souls to meet. Tragically, I had only a few years of this perfect companionship. La Boétie died of the plague in 1563, when he was only 32. I was devastated. It was the single greatest loss of my life. I wrote that no fortune could repair it, and that I would never find another such friend. I didn't. I never tried to replace him. It would have been futile. Instead, I cherish his memory and even published some of his writings to honor him. My essay on friendship is, in part, a tribute to him and to the very idea of pure friendship. I wanted readers to know what true friendship could be, even if most of us never experience its highest form. What makes such friendship special? I contrasted it with more common bonds, friendships of utility or pleasure, which Aristotle talked about. Most friends are friends because they help each other or enjoy each other's company, which is fine, but it's not the ultimate. True friendship, for me, has no calculation and no shallow motive. We didn't love each other for benefit. In fact, as a magistrate, he once ruled against me in a legal matter, and I respected him more for his integrity. We didn't even love for any particular quality, not for his wit or my kindness or whatever. We loved the whole person, the essence. That's why I can only say, it was him and it was me. Remove either, and the equation doesn't work. I know this all might sound idealized. Indeed, I put friendship on a pedestal. Some readers found it excessive, but I was self-aware about it. I acknowledge in my writing that this level of friendship is extremely rare. In fact, I basically say it's miraculous. If there is one thing of which there is few examples in the world, it is a true friendship. I noted elsewhere. I also recognize that not everyone agreed with me, especially about excluding other bonds. For instance, I said women unfortunately rarely attain this deep friendship with men because societal inequality made such meeting of minds difficult, a reflection of my time sexism, perhaps. Today, perhaps I'd revise that and say anyone can in theory be such friends if they are equals in spirit. The key is equality and acceptance. In our friendship, no one was subordinate, neither tried to change the other, We were perfectly aligned in values and respect. From this friendship, I drew a broader lesson: the value of connection and open-heartedness. I learned that to truly know and be known by another soul is one of life's greatest joys. It taught me trust because I could be completely vulnerable with La Boety and never fear judgment or betrayal. It also taught me about loss and grief, as losing him was terribly painful. Yet, I did not regret a single moment of our closeness, even though it made the loss cut deep. I even embraced the pain of loss as a part of the friendship's value. Here I quietly diverge from the Stoics who say one should not overly grieve. To me, the sorrow of losing a true friend is a price worth paying for the happiness of having had one. In practical terms, I advise people on friendship like this. If you find a friend of such caliber, cherish them, be loyal, and be honest. Friendship, I said, is based on complete frankness. A friend is half of my soul. So how could I hide anything from him? I shared everything with La Boety, and he with me. That honesty is a foundation. Also, don't debase the word friend by applying it to every acquaintance. We have lots of comrades, colleagues, drinking buddies, fine. But a true friend, maybe you'll get one or two in a lifetime. Know the difference. I was almost comically strict on this. I claimed no one could have many true friends, because that kind of deep love is like a spotlight, not a wide beam. So I gave the title friend rarely, but when I did, I meant it fully. My exploration of friendship wasn't just sentimental. It was also a bit philosophical. I compared it to marriage, filial duty, and other bonds, and found friendship, at least the way I define it, to be freer and more pure. In marriage, there are legal and physical bonds. In kinship, there's blood and obligation. In friendship, real friendship, there's nothing binding you except mutual choice and affection. That's why I prize it so highly. It's love for love's own sake. People continue to quote my line asterisk, because it was he, because it was I, to signify that special alchemy that occurs with a true friend or true love. It's become a classic statement on friendship's mystery. If you've ever had a friend where you just click and you do anything for each other, you might smile at that line and think of them. And if you haven't, don't lose hope. I like to think reading about such friendship might prepare your heart to recognize it if it comes. I can't promise everyone a La Boety, but I can tell you that valuing your friendships and nurturing them with honesty and kindness will enrich your life immensely. Even my other friendships, far less intense, benefited from what I learned with La Boety. I became a better friend, more loyal and candid, because of him. In short, I hold that friendship is one of the highest human experiences. It is, as I said, a warmth of mind that joins and melts two souls together. If you find that in life, you are truly lucky. I was, for a time, and that shining example has been a guiding light for me in all my human relationships. It taught me what humans are capable of in terms of love, trust, and union. Because it was he, because it was I. 6 simple words that contain a world of meaning about the beautiful irrationality of deep affection. If you understand that, you understand Montaigne's heart. What do I know? Embracing uncertainty and skepticism. Now we arrive at what might be my most famous contribution to philosophy, my skepticism, summed up in my personal motto, "Que or what do I know? I had this phrase engraved on a medal I often wore, and it appears throughout my book. Don't get the wrong idea, though. I wasn't a doomsayer claiming humans know nothing at all. Rather, I champion a humble, questioning attitude. I believe that we should doubt our own knowledge and stay wary of certainty, especially dogmatic, pompous certainty. Why was I so skeptical? Partly, it was the bloody religious wars around me. Catholics and Protestants, each utterly sure they alone possess the truth and slaughtering each other. I was appalled by this fanaticism. In my view, The problem wasn't religion per se, but the arrogant certainty each side had. They would not admit the possibility that they could be wrong, or that the truth might be more complex. So they wouldn't compromise or tolerate. My skepticism was, in many ways, a reaction to this. I thought, if people could just utter the words, I might be wrong, or I don't know for sure, so much human misery could be avoided. Acknowledging our ignorance makes us more prudent and less cruel. I also had a very curious and flexible mind by nature. I'd read tons of accounts of strange phenomena, travelers' tales, philosophies, etc. The more I read and experienced, the more I saw how uncertain and subjective most supposed truths are. Our senses fool us regularly. Optical illusions, hearing our name in the wind, you name it. Our reason is often just a clever advocate for what we want to believe, rather than an impartial judge. And custom, as we discussed, can make even wild notions seem obviously true to some and false to others. So I concluded that human knowledge is severely limited and often unreliable. In my longest essay, Apology for Raymond Sebin, I really let loose with skeptical arguments. Some readers were shocked at how far I went. I basically borrowed the arsenal of the ancient skeptic philosophers, like Pyrrho and Sextus, to attack the pretensions of human reason. For example, I asked, how do you know your senses give you the real picture of the world? Animals perceive things very differently. An eagle sees far sharper than we do. Dogs hear sound we cannot. A pig can sniff truffles underground. Some creatures see in ultraviolet light or echolocate. Are their impressions less true than ours? Who's to say the world really looks like what humans see? Perhaps to the cosmic eye, we're the blind ones. And our mind, we think it's so great, but it's often full of our body and emotions. For instance, I told a story of how imagination can trick us. A friend of mine handed a certain potent drug, some say it was an aphrodisiac, to a man, telling him it would affect him. The man, believing it, promptly showed all the symptoms, though the pill was fake, such as the power of belief to create its own reality. I even cheekily suggested that animals might be smarter or at least not inferior to us in some ways. When my cat and I play, I asked, how do I know she's not using me for entertainment, rather than I her? It's a funny thought but carries a sting. We always assume we're the boss, the pinnacle of creation, but what if an alien intelligence would see us as just another creature, sometimes clever, often ridiculous? I pointed out that animals often excel at things naturally that we struggle to learn. Birds navigate huge distances, spiders weave intricate webs, bees organize a complex society, all without attending university. So maybe we shouldn't be so full of ourselves. The heart of my skepticism is this: be careful about what you claim to know for sure. We often firmly believe things that later turn out false. As I said, nothing is so firmly believed as that which we least know, an ironic truth. I don't say truth doesn't exist. I actually believe truth with a capital T might exist, perhaps known fully only by God. But I doubted human ability to attain it absolutely. Therefore, the wise course is to doubt, inquire, and be content with probabilities and personal experience rather than absolute certainties. This leads to a certain intellectual humility. What I know was not a despairing shrug from me. It was a genuine question. It implies openness to learning. If I admit I don't know everything, I am ready to listen, to observe, to learn from others and from the world. This attitude protected me from two dangers. One, the dogmatism of the learned, who often insist they have the answer from some book or theory. And two, the superstition of the ignorant, who will believe wild rumors or quack cures without evidence. By doubting, I steer a middle course. Interestingly, my skepticism also gave me a sort of inner peace. If you realize that so much is uncertain, you stop fretting over things beyond your grasp. You focus on what you can directly experience and improve, like your own behavior, your friendships, your immediate duties. Grand theories about the cosmos or the one true church became less urgent to me. I once wrote, "Opinion is a fool, anxiety is her punishment." By that I meant, if you hold rigid opinions, you'll constantly be anxious whenever reality or other people contradict them, which happens often. But if you hold your opinions lightly and keep an open mind, you won't be upset when confronted with difference or mystery. My stance did anger some people. They thought I was wishy-washy or undermining moral truths. But I disagree. I had strong moral instincts like kindness, honesty, but I was skeptical of any absolute formulas. For instance, I distrust those who say their religion or ideology is the only way for everyone. In my time, this tolerance was rare. I'd basically call for people of different faiths or philosophies to asterisk accept that we're all ignorant in the grand scheme, and thus to tolerate and live peacefully with disagreement. That's a pretty modern liberal idea. In fact, folks later call me an early father of modern skepticism and liberal thinking for this. I wasn't systematically philosophical like Descartes, who ironically took skepticism and then claimed to find certainty. I think, therefore I am clever, but I remain more doubtfully inclined. I was more like a friendly skeptic, nudging you. Are you sure about that, my friend? Might it not be otherwise? I also applied skepticism to myself. Throughout my essays, I sometimes contradict earlier statements. Instead of hiding that, I openly admit, I may contradict myself, but the truth I speak is according to the moment I'm in. I change my mind on certain issues over time, and I'm fine with that. Consistency is overrated if it means clinging to old views when new insight comes. I prefer to be honest about my inconsistent, undulating mind and a feign of certainty I don't have. This is part of my skepticism, too. Recognizing that human beings are inconstant by nature, we evolve, our perspectives shift with new experiences. We are, all of us, made up of bits and pieces, and so shapeless and diverse a composition that each bit, each moment, plays its own game. I wrote. So, what do I know at one moment might not be what I know the next. And that's okay. Embracing uncertainty doesn't mean abandoning reason or falling in denialism. I still use reason. I just use it with self-awareness. I enjoyed exploring ideas, testing them, but I always kept in mind that my conclusion is provisional. This made me a fairly easygoing person. I didn't get into fistfights over beliefs. I could dine with Protestants or Catholics or free thinkers and find common ground, because I wasn't hell-bent on proving I was right. I wish more people had done the same. It would have saved a lot of lives and heartache in my France. In summary, what do I know? Is the guiding question of my philosophy. It reminds us to be humble, curious, and tolerant. It's an antidote to arrogance. Try adopting it in your own mind. Whenever you feel absolutely certain about something, especially something you haven't personally verified, pause and ask, wait, what do I really know about this? You may find that some of your certainty was just habit or hearsay. That's not to make you paralyzed with doubt, but to make you thoughtful. Make decisions, yes, but with an understanding that you might be wrong and might need to adjust. As I see it, life is too full of complexity for any one dogma to capture it all. Better to appreciate the mysteries and muddle through wisely and kindly than to pretend to have all the answers and turn vicious defending them. In a word, stay skeptical, friends. It keeps you honest. Virtue without fanaticism. Living a good life naturally. Let's talk about virtue, that old-fashioned word for moral excellence. Sounds stiff and priggish, doesn't it? But fear not. Montaigne's take on virtue is refreshingly down to earth. I admire goodness, yes, but I hated fanaticism and pretentious moralizing. I believed in living a balanced, honorable life guided by virtue, but without going extreme or inhuman lengths. In short, virtue should be human and kind, not rigid and cruel. One of my recurring themes is the idea of moderation. On the ceiling of my study, I had inscriptions of wisdom, and one of them effectively was be moderate. I observed that people who chase perfection or absolute purity often become tyrants of themselves or others. For example, some religious ascetics of my day try to live like angels, fasting, denying every pleasure, flogging their flesh. To what end? They usually became either self-righteous or eventually gave up and swung to indulgence. On the other hand, I saw people of genuine virtue who were cheerful, ordinary folks. They enjoyed life's simple pleasures in measure and treated others decently. I much preferred the latter. I famously said, "It is good to be born in a very depraved time, for by comparison you gain a reputation for virtue at little cost." This tongue-in-cheek remark highlights that one can be considered virtuous simply by not being as awful as the worst around us. I was living through Civil War atrocities. After all, in such times, just not killing or persecuting others made you a saint in my eyes. I'll take that small cost virtue any day. It's better than pretending to be a flawless hero. So what virtues did I champion? Honesty, for one. I practiced and preached a kind of plain-speaking sincerity. I despised dissimulation, wearing a mask of virtue. A generous heart should not disguise its thoughts. I wrote asterisks, but lay them open as they are. I tried to do that myself. You've seen how candid I am about my own failings. I think there's virtue in that transparency. It breeds trust. I also valued kindness and mercy highly. In an era of cruelty, I often argue that mercy is the nobler path. I wrote an essay of cruelty, where I basically say cruelty is the worst vice, and I pride myself on my utter detestation of it. I couldn't even bear to see an animal in pain. Some of my contemporaries consider that soft. I considered it deeply virtuous to have compassion. In politics, I lean toward clemency, compromise, and humane governance. Machiavelli's idea that rulers should be ready to be ruthless? I wasn't a fan. I opined that trickery and violence backfire. Any gain you get by immoral means will be washed away by the chaos it sows. Instead, I cited Cicero, asterisk, nothing is so popular as goodness. People will ultimately love and respect a leader or any person who is fair and kind, more than one who is fearsome. I tried to live this in my own small roles. As mayor of Bordeaux for 2 terms, I was known for being a mediator, a peacemaker who put humanity above sectarianism. I'm proud of that legacy. Another virtue I emphasize is self-knowledge and acceptance, which we've already covered. I see it as a virtue to know your limits and not pretend to be something you're not. There's an honesty and integrity in that. Some folks think virtue means always striving to be superhuman. I think virtue begins with acknowledging your humanness. For example, if I know I'm quick-tempered, the virtuous thing is to admit it and work on patience, not to deny it while secretly letting it color my actions. I also believe in accepting the natural pleasures and cycles of life. Eating, drinking, sleeping, sex, laughing. These are not sins in my book, so long as done with moderation and respect. I actually wrote quite frankly about bodily pleasures and the importance of embracing them in due measure. Unlike some moralists, I didn't see our bodies as enemies of virtue, but as companions. The body has its needs and rhythms. A wise person attends to them rather than tries to conquer them entirely. I was critical of the Stoics in this regard, those ancient philosophers who preached impassivity. While I admired their strength, I felt they asked too high a price in emotional sterilization. I admitted I couldn't be like a stone. I feel pain. I feel joy. Virtue, to me, is shown in how we manage those feelings. not in pretending we don't have them. For instance, when my friend died, the Stoic advice would be, do not mourn excessively. It's nature. My approach was, I will mourn deeply because that love deserves it, but I will also eventually recover and not let grief destroy me. That middle path, honoring feelings but not being enslaved by them, is where I see virtue. One of my favorite virtues, and one I think I possessed, is equanimity, a fancy word for a level-headed tranquility. Not that I was always tranquil, but I aspired to a kind of contentment with whatever life brings. I often say the highest goal is living tranquilly. Virtue, for me, isn't constant heroics. It's stability, moderation, and contentment. All the glory I seek is to live a calm life. I wrote, asterisk, not according to any one ideal pattern, but according to me. In other words, I aim to be good in my own way, suited to my nature, not according to some philosopher's rigid mold. This ties back to authenticity. Interestingly, my skepticism and virtue ethics intertwine. Because I doubt grand systems, I fall back on everyday virtue. I might not know with certainty what the ultimate good is, but I have a pretty solid sense that kindness, honesty, loyalty, moderation, and courage are beneficial traits. They make life better for ourselves and others. I didn't need a grand theory to live by those. Common sense and my own conscience were my guides. I urged everyone to trust their conscience, unless terribly corrupted by custom. But most people, if they search their heart, know when they're doing wrong. Conscience and reason, applied to one's particular life, suffice for virtue without needing fanatical rules. One practical piece of advice I gave is keep a back shop, by which I meant maintain a private reserve of self, a little sanctuary of your own values, so that even if the world goes mad around you, you have an inner compass. This was crucial in Civil War times. I retreated to my tower, literally, to preserve my sanity and principles when France was engulfed in madness. I think that's virtuous, too, to not lose oneself in the crowd's vices. Sometimes virtue means having the courage to stand apart. I didn't fight in the wars. I didn't want to kill for either side. Some call that cowardly or indecisive. I call it moral courage to say, I will not become a murderer even if my side urges it. I tried to serve as a negotiator instead. That was my path of virtue in a violent time, and it came from not buying to others' zealotry. In sum, my idea of virtue is very human-centric and practical. Be a good person, but be a person, not an angel, not a machine. Avoid extremes, neither be a debauched fool nor an austere monk. Fulfill your duties to family, country, friends, but not slavishly. Use judgment and mercy. Restrain your worst impulses, but gently. Help others and also enjoy life. I even quipped, the middle road, the safe road, thou shalt guide. No fairer doctrine was ever taught. I wanted to bring philosophy back from the heavens to the kitchen and bedroom, to everyday life, where living well really happens. If that means I value an honest farmer who never read Plato over a professor who preaches virtue while cheating his colleagues, so be it. I do. To me, the farmer is more virtuous. Ultimately, virtue for Montaigne equals living according to one's best self, the self that is thoughtful, kind, moderate, and honest, and crucially, doing so naturally with pleasure even. I often cited that the best deeds are those done with a cheerful countenance. A grudging virtue isn't much fun for anyone. If you do good, try to do it gladly. I personally find that a hearty lunch and a good nap greatly improve my inclination to be virtuous. I'm only half joking. A well-rested, content person is more likely to be kind and patient than a miserable ascetic, in my experience. So, if you're aiming for virtue, take my advice. Don't strain so hard you burst. Nurture your goodness like a plant. Give it sunshine, joy, water, reflection, and prune it when needed self-correction. But don't freeze it in a block of ice. A living virtue breathes. Be good, but also be you. That's the Montaigne way. The oddity of human nature. Embracing our humanness. Humans, what peculiar creatures we are. After a lifetime of studying myself and others, I developed a kind of amused affection for the wild inconsistency and folly of human nature. If there's one thing I hope my essays convey, it's that to be human is to be a walking bundle of contradictions. And that's okay. In fact, recognizing this is key to understanding ourselves and getting along with each other. I famously wrote that man is indeed an odd, variable, and fickle creature, asterisk, a marvelously vain, diverse, and undulating thing. We swing from one mood to another, hold incompatible opinions, and change with the wind. One day we're brave, the next day cowardly, kind in the morning, cruel by afternoon, wise in one decision, foolish in the next. I certainly saw that in myself. One of my essays is titled Of the Inconstancy of Our Actions, where I illustrate how the same person can behave very differently in different contexts. Does that mean we're all hypocrites? Not exactly. It's just that our nature isn't uniform or steady. We are not like clockwork. We're more like weather, sometimes sunny, sometimes stormy, often a mix. I urge readers to asterisk accept this monstrous mixture that we are. We're each like a chimera, a mythical creature composed of many animals. This might sound depressing, but I actually found comfort and humor in it. Because if you accept that humans are fallible and eccentric by nature, you become more forgiving. I learned to laugh at human folly rather than rage at it. I took inspiration from the Greek philosopher Democritus, who was known as the laughing philosopher, because he famously laughed at the vanity of human endeavor. Contrast with Heraclitus, the weeping philosopher who pitied human misery. I sided with the laughter. We're more goofy than evil much of the time. We are not so full of evil as of absurdity. So when I saw, say, a pompous noble strutting or a scholar splitting hairs or crowds going after some fad, I'd chuckle and think, such is humanity, including me. This attitude kept me from bitterness. I also used this understanding to cut people some slack. For instance, I know that even a generally honest person might lie in a pinch, or a generally calm person might explode if provoked enough. Should I forever condemn them for that lapse? No, because I recognize myself in it. There's no use crying treason every time a friend acts unlike the perfect ideal. I essentially wrote, we must tolerate a bit of each other's inconsistency, since we all have it. This isn't to excuse serious betrayals, but for the everyday unpredictability. A wise person shrugs and forgives. Importantly, I didn't conclude humans are inconsistent, so let's give up on coherence entirely. Rather, I believe in the quest of self-improvement, while acknowledging you'll never be flawless. My goal was to know my own quirks. For example, I identified that I'm prone to boredom with long, complex arguments. Ironically, for a writer, I know. So I seldom force myself to wade through them. Instead, I prefer digesting ideas in bite-sized, meandering fashion. That's embracing my nature. But if I identified a flaw like prejudice or cruelty in myself, I would work to curb it because being humane was a value I held. So, embrace your overall humanity, but refine it at the edges where it counts. One particularly shocking and illuminating admission I made about human nature is regarding our common bodily functions. I spared little detail in discussing how even the loftiest individuals must answer nature's call. On the highest throne in the world, we are seated still upon our arses. I reminded everyone, and kings and philosophers shit, and so do ladies. Now, I know that's crude, but I meant it pointedly. Everyone, from emperor to peasant, shares the same fundamental biology. We all get headaches. We all digest food. We all die. By pointing this out to the gas of some readers, I aim to puncture our delusions of superiority and separateness. The queen preening in silk? Underneath, she's as human as her chambermaid, quite literally naked under her clothes and subject to intestinal rumblings. Realizing this fosters a certain egalitarianism. It's hard to hold on to snobbish pride when you remember that simple fact. This was my little way of keeping perspective. It's also an antidote to shame. Why should I be embarrassed that I have bodily needs when even the most esteemed person does? So you see, my earthy talk has a philosophical purpose, to ground us, sometimes with thud, in our shared humanity. I was notably candid about topics usually swept under the rug, illness, sexuality, aging, smells, physical weaknesses. I spoke of my own kidney stone attacks, for instance, in unflinching detail, describing the agony and how it humbled me. I figure, if I can confess the indignities of groaning in pain on the chamber pot, then readers might feel less alone in their sufferings. We're all in this human condition together. Why pretend otherwise? My candor was meant to dissolve stigma and pretense. People in my time rarely wrote about things like impotence or digestion. Not to be lewd, but to say, this too is part of life. Don't be so uptight about it. And by including these, I also break the monotony of lofty discourse. One minute I quote Plato, next minute I mention farting. Surprise! If it jolts you, good. You're awake and you might realize philosophy and everyday life are not separate. I constantly illustrate how the great and small are intertwined. Even on the highest throne, you're still sitting on your behind. Such lines stick with people because they carry truth with humor. I use them to attack vanity, the human tendency to puff ourselves up. We're vain in both senses, conceited and also transient, vain meaning futile. Recognizing our absurdity is actually the first step to wisdom. When you know you're a bit ridiculous, you're freer. You don't have to keep up a facade of perfection. Another aspect of human nature I highlight is our subjection to fortune, chance. We like to think we're fully in control, but so much is not. Our birth, our physical attributes, random events. I gave the image of us as boats adrift on a sea. We are carried away like objects floating on a stream, now gently, now violently, according to the water's flow. We go indifferently where the tide takes us. That might sound fatalistic, but I intended it to humble our egos. Many high and mighty folks thought their success was all they're doing. I pointed out luck played a huge role, realizing that can make us less proud and more grateful. It also teaches flexibility. If the tide changes, we should be able to adjust. Recall earlier I said adaptability is our key talent. And oh, the diversity of human opinions and customs. That was another proof of our nature's kaleidoscope. I present how something one culture prizes, another scorns, highlighting that there's no single normal for humans except perhaps our shared biology. This gave me a chuckle and also a mission to urge tolerance. Since humans are so diverse, let's not kill each other over those differences. That ties in with my skepticism and relativism we discussed. To sum up, I see human nature as a glorious mess. We are vain, fragile, goofy, noble, intelligent, and stupid all at once. And the best approach is to acknowledge it and even smile at it. My approach to self and others is, I see that we're all absurd, myself first, so let's be patient and gentle. When we slip up, it's just human. When we do something surprisingly wise or kind, that's human too. I encourage an attitude of bemused compassion. Laugh at the folly, love the fool. For truly each of us is Le Faux, the fool, at times. This view freed me from many illusions. I don't expect saints everywhere, so I'm not overly disappointed by people. I don't expect myself to be consistent, so I'm not devastated when I change. Instead, I marvel at how interesting this human carnival is. As I wrote, each man contains a whole form of human condition. So in one person's life, you can see the gamut of existing E. That's fascinating. It means any story, however small, can teach us about the wider human story. That belief is precisely why I thought my own personal essays might be valuable. Not because I'm special, but because I'm human and nothing human is alien to me. So, I invite you to take the same delight in our shared human weirdness. Don't be too hard on yourself for being inconsistent or imperfect. That's literally your design. Instead of despairing, I'm only human, say it with a grin. Ha! I'm human. What did I expect? And then carry on trying your best. Accepting our nature is a first step to maybe improving it a bit, or at least not making it worse with denial. I think if we all admitted how alike we are in our foolishness, we'd be kinder and maybe laugh together more. And laughing together at the human comedy, rather than sneering or preaching, is a virtue in itself, in my opinion. How to Live, Montaigne's Guide to a Good Life. We wandered through many topics: self-knowledge, mortality, custom education, friendship, skepticism, virtue, human folly, all in a conversational ramble, very Montaigne-like, if I say so. Now you might wonder, what's the ultimate takeaway? If Montaigne could give us advice on how to live, what would it be? Well, I won't give you a strict recipe, that's not my style, but I can wrap up with some friendly guidance distilled from my experience, a kind of informal handbook for the good life, Montaigne style. 1. Know yourself and be yourself. Life's big task, as I see it, is understanding who you are and learning to belong to yourself. I wrote, the greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself. This means not living by others' expectations or some artificial ideal, but in line with your own nature and reason. I have spent thousands of pages essentially examining myself so that I might live authentically. Do likewise in your own way. Reflect on your experiences, notice your strengths and weaknesses, and accept yourself fully. That doesn't mean never change or improve. It means any change comes from self-understanding rather than self-loathing or conformity. Authenticity, coupled with self-awareness, is the bedrock of a life well lived. 2. Embrace life's fullness, including its end. Don't shy away from any aspect of life, be it joy or pain, body or mind, work or play. I advocate a rich engagement with living. Savor simple pleasures, a good meal, a walk in the countryside, a laugh with friends, the smell of your garden after rain. I famously love good wine and conversation. I wasn't about hair-shirt holiness. At the same time, face the hard parts, illness, loss, and ultimately death. As we discuss, come to terms with mortality. It's a part of life's fullness. To live well, learn to die well. And you won't be haunted by fear or by accepting death. You paradoxically enhance your appreciation for life. Every day becomes more precious when you remember it's finite. So live with gusto but also serenity, knowing each moment is a gift, not a guarantee. 3. Cultivate your mind, but wear your learning lightly. I encourage you to read widely and curiously. Travel through books and knowledge. But do it to enrich your understanding and enjoyment of the world, not to show off or dogmatize. Remember, what do I know? Stay humble intellectually. Use knowledge as a tool to improve judgment and empathy, not as a cudgel to bash others or boost your ego. And never stop learning. I, in my later years, wrote, my trade and art is living. That means I considered living itself as an art to refine, and learning was fuel for that. So yes, read the philosophers, learn skills, explore sciences, but always connect it back to life. If reading Stoic wisdom helps you endure a bad day, excellent. If learning a new language helps you make a friend, wonderful. Knowledge is best when it helps you live more happily and wisely. If it doesn't, feel free to forget it. I forgot most of what I read, and honestly, it didn't hurt me. I kept what was useful. 4. Practice moderation and flexibility. Extremes are not your friend. The middle way, balancing work and leisure, reason and emotion, self-care and care for others, is the golden road I advise. This doesn't mean mediocrity. It means harmony. Too much rigidity and you'll break when the wind blows. Too much looseness and you'll never build anything solid. Be like a tree that is strong but sways in the breeze. I changed certain views over time. That was me swaying when evidence or context changed. But I held steady to core values like honesty and kindness. Those were my solid trunk. So, find your core principles, but be flexible in application. And avoid fanaticism. Nothing good comes of thinking you have to be 100% consistent or 100% devoted to one narrow path. Life is various. Allow yourself to be various too. 5. Make a private sanctuary for your mind. I mentioned the back shop or inner room. This is crucial. Have a space, literal or mental, where you can retreat and be with yourself. In our busy world, mine was busy too, though differently. One can lose oneself in noise. I withdrew to my library tower often, not to escape duties entirely, but to renew myself. In solitude, we can reflect, read, and just exist without performing. Maintain this independence of spirit. As I advise, retire into yourself, especially when the world roars too loud. Even amid action, keep an inner reserved area where you remain you, not swept up by the crowd. This way, you won't betray your conscience or lose your mind in collective madness. Solitude and reflection are the nurses of wisdom. Use them. 6. Nurture genuine friendships and human connections. Though I cherish solitude, I equally cherish my connections. No one is an island. Love, be it friendship, familial affection, or romantic love, is central to a good life. My bond with La Boétie taught me the heights of friendship. Not everyone gets that, but everyone can cultivate meaningful relationships. Value quality over quantity. A few close friends whom you trust and can be your unfiltered self with are worth more than hundreds of superficial contacts. Be loyal, be honest, be giving in those relationships. And as I said earlier, share in each other's humanity. Forgive flaws, celebrate virtues. Life's burdens become lighter, and its joys greater when shared. Even in my most pain-racked days, kidney stones, ouch! A kind presence or a letter from a friend lifted my spirits. And when I died, I'm sure it was the love I gave and received that mattered, not any professional accolade. So invest in people. 7. Accept others and yourself as human. This is repeating a bit, but I can't emphasize enough. Tolerate, forgive, and enjoy the differences in people. Don't try to remake everyone to your standard. And don't torment yourself trying to live up to someone else's image. Recognize that messy human nature we discussed. It will save you frustration. When offended or disappointed by someone, ask, have I never done something similar? Am I not human too? This often engenders compassion. I found that by admitting my own shortcomings readily, I became far more patient with others. A world of Montaignes, all confessing, I'm a bit of a coward sometimes, or I often change my mind, etc., would be a world with less judgment and more understanding. So start with you. Be frank about your humanity and allow others theirs. Society will be gentler for it. 8. Don't worry too much about legacy or fame. I retired early from public life and spent years writing these essays without any certainty of how they'd be received. I wasn't chasing fame, though I became somewhat famous. My advice: focus on living well, not on how you'll be remembered. Obsessing over your legacy is just another ego trap. The truth is, once you're dead, you won't know or care what people say, if you even exist in any form. So put your energy into present life. I wrote, "The honor I seek is to have lived quietly and comfortably, not what people say of me after." Ironically, by not caring too much about glory, I achieved a kind of pure voice that did resonate long term. But even if my pages were lost, I'd be content knowing I spent my days in good conversation, with friends, with my books, and in contemplation. So, measure success by your own sense of growth and contentment, not by external accolades. 9. Find joy in the little things, and don't torment yourself with what you can't control. I've stressed enjoying life's simple pleasures. I'll stress it again. A well-cooked goose, a friendly chat by the fireplace, the sight of my garden in bloom, a good joke. These were as important to me as any high philosophy. I consider it a virtue to know how to enjoy life. Conversely, I trained myself to let go of matters beyond my influence. Wars rage around me. I did what I could to help, but I did let anxiety over the state of France eat me alive when I knew I personally couldn't stop all the violence. Do your best in what you can affect, and for the rest, have the wisdom to take it in stride. This approach is freeing. Much suffering comes from kicking against things we have no power over. I learned to say, well, that's how it is. What can I do? And then put my focus on that actionable part. 10. Keep your sense of humor. If you've noticed, I often use humor, sometimes earthy, sometimes sly, to soften heavy topics. This isn't just a writing trick. It's a life philosophy. Laugh at absurdities, especially your own. Life is too short and strange to be always grave. A good laugh is medicine for soul. When I had my near-death horse accident, you know what I did after recovering. I wrote about it in detail, yes, but I also found a kind of cosmic humor in how unpredictable fate is. Laughter and wisdom, to me, are allies. Both come from perspective. So cultivate a light heart. You can be wise and witty at once. In fact, I think true wisdom often smiles. At the end of the day, if someone asks, "Montaigne, what have you learned about how to live?" I'd answer, live fully and mindfully. Don't isolate one part of life, reason or soul or body or society. Engage with it all, but with awareness and discernment. Treat life as an experiment. Your own personal attempt. Try things. See what works for you. Learn from others, but also think for yourself. And remember that life ultimately is its own answer. You don't solve life like a problem, you live it. Day by day, moment by moment, making your path by walking. I wrote, "The purpose of life is to live it, to live well and right, not to obsess about its length or about some grand answer." As I sign off, I imagine you and I have been sitting in my garden or by the hearth, having this long chat. I perhaps rambled, I do that. But I hope in my ramblings you found some nuggets that speak to you. I speak to you across centuries as a friend, a flawed, candid friend who cares about your well-being. Take what you will from my experiences. If nothing else, I hope I've shown you a portrait of a man who made peace with himself and sought wisdom in the ordinary, and that you find that encouraging. If I, a fairly average fellow, with kidney stones and fears and all, could craft a contented life through reflection and balance, then surely you can too. I'll leave you with one of my favorite insights. The continuous work of your life is to build your own death. That sounds grim, but it means live in such a way that whenever you die, you're ready and at peace, having no regret that you didn't live true to yourself. Day by day, you are constructing the house of you. Build it with love, humor, tolerance, and truth. That way, when death comes knocking, you can say, I was expecting you. The house is in order, and you can step out without fear, having truly lived. Farewell, friend. Live boldly, live kindly, and never stop asking, what do I know?